again. I'm going to correct one thing she said. I'm no longer the associate dean. I'm just somebody working with a 4-H center. But it is my third rehire, and I'm glad to continue to be able to help. It's really good to be with you, to see so many friends from years ago. I do come through Eatonton quite often. I go back to Rock Eagle. Right now, I go at least once a week, and sometimes more often than that. It's good to see a lot of people that I haven't seen. I told Brenda a day or two ago that said, listen, I'm going to get up and go to church and go to Sunday school in Eatonton and have lunch at Rock Eagle, and do you want to go with me? And she said, no, I wish you the best. And so, really pleased today to see my old classmate in throughout that I grew up with, Ed Ricketson, who lives out on the lake. Ed, I have your mother's painting of the old schoolhouse hanging in our living room. I wish you'd help me find a copy of the Ogeechee River Mill painting that your mother did. I would just love to have one of those. There's a lot of things I could say to start off, but most importantly, to say thank you for allowing me to come and take another trip back down memory lane, at least for me, to relive the history of how Rock Eagle, or how the State 4-H Center ended up here in Putnam County out at the Rock Eagle Park. And that is kind of the task that I will try to address. I would also be remiss if I didn't thank a couple of people who are not in the room. At least I'm pretty sure they're not in the room. And one is Tina Maddox, who is also a retired employee that worked at Rock Eagle, who has helped me put together many presentations over the years, and she helped me with this one as well. But most importantly, my good friend and former colleague, Ina Cook Hopkins. Ina is the author of the book, Rock Eagle, the Centerpiece of Georgia 4-H. I won't go into all the details of how this came about, but this was a labor of love that took 9.5 years. We started off thinking we'd have a 100-page book. It's 640 pages with 900 illustrations. I have several copies out in the truck. Be glad to say you want at the end of this, because you can learn a lot more from that. Most everything I'll tell you today came from that book. I have added a few things of more recent history, but also some things that are not in the book. Ina and I met as 4-Hers. We were running for district office in June of 1971. There were 6 districts in the state. We were in the old Northeast District, and we had to come up with campaign slogans. And I don't remember what mine was, and I don't remember what Ina's was, but I do remember one girl from Putnam County whose slogan was, vote for me, vote for Pretty Patty Pooh from Putnam County. You know her as Patty Swiper. And so Patty, it's good to see you and Dee as well. And I wish Ina was here. Matter of fact, if I could have got Ina here, I'd just let her do it. She'd do it much better. My first trip to the Smithsonian was in the summer of 1972, and one of the people on that trip that I met from Baldwin County was Colonel Tom Torrance, who is with us today. Tom, I think that was our first meeting, and that's been, how many years that is? 50-something years now, but it's great to see you here too, as well. So, as I said, I could talk about a lot of different things, but I think you want to know a little bit about how Rock Eagle, or the 4-H Center, ended up in this state. But I think Brenda, my wife, tells me often that I live in the past too much, and that's probably true, but I think there's a lot of things in the past that we can continue to learn from the mistakes of our ancestors, but also the values and the work ethic that our ancestors had. So as I go through this, you may have a question. I'll be glad to take questions at the end. And for those of you that are extension people, this is a little different from anything they may have heard me do before. So we know that, well, Vicki, I think we're not working now, so. There we go, okay. We know that early man migrated from Asia into North America during the Ice Age, when the sea levels were much lower than they are today. And the earliest inhabitants of Georgia were the Paleo Indians from the time of about 10,000 to 8,000 BC. These were nomadic people that moved around quite a bit, hunting and fishing and trying to make their livelihood, or really just find food and shelter. The period of time from 8,000 BC to 1,000 BC is known as the Archaic Indians. They began to settle, and they moved seasonally just to find food as they lived. They also began to be part of communities and civilizations. The woodland period between 1000 BC and 800 AD, those people continued to hunt and fish, but they also began to develop some agricultural practices and began to store food in the wintertime, or store food for later use in the winter. They began to settle around streams, and they built larger and more permanent dwellings as well. And they also had religious rituals which became more prominent in their lives. And this is the era that most believe that the Rock Eagle effigy and Rock Hawk effigy were built. The Mississippian era continued from 800 AD to 1540 AD, and these people began to settle around rivers and use those rivers for transportation and trading of items up and down the rivers, and they too advanced their religious beliefs. And then the Creek Indians were here from 1540 and it says to present day, but they're the most recent inhabitants that were indigenous people to this area. They had concentrations of houses and gave us the melodious, I can't say that word, but the melodies of the rivers that we know around us, such as the Appalachie, the Ogeechee, the Oconee, and the Ocmulgee, which form the Altamaha River. And I always like to tell people I grew up on what's called Long Creek of the Ogeechee. My father had a farm on the Ogeechee River right on the Hancock-Warren County line, and he was ill when I was a child and ended up passing away when I was 11 years old. But I remember, and I told this earlier this week, I remember crying the day he told me that he was going to sell that farm because it meant so much. And I remember fondly that Mama got a dryer. We got 2 window units for air conditioning, and my sister and I got a check for $500. So, but it was a sad day at the end of all time for me anyway. Let's see, I'm gonna get too fast now. Vicki, can you advance it to, there we go, thank you. It's documented that Hernando de Soto camped along the Oconee River, and in April of 1540, he was here about 10 days. I think he had 3 journalists with him at the time. We know that the Creek Indians provided guides and food and shelter for De Soto and his colleagues. Keep my thumb on the right spot. In May 12th of 1873 was the first of many treaties whereby the Creek Indians began to cede their land to the United States or to the British. Also in that same year, there we go. Went too far that time.
There you go.
There we go. Also, in 1785, the University of Georgia was chartered. And you may, for those of you that are University of Georgia graduates, you know that we refer to ourselves as the birthplace of public higher education in the United States. First class was not taught there until 1801, but we were chartered 16 years before that. In 1803, the Treaty of Augusta included secession of 3 million acres of land between the Ogeechee and the Oconee rivers. And that would be primarily part of what's now Hancock County. There is a very good book that details the story of the land between the rivers, and that is between the Ogeechee and the Oconee. There were several other treaties between the Native Americans and the United States government, which led the Creeks to ceding land between the Oconee and Mulligan rivers, and that's where Putnam County was originated from. In 1807, the General Assembly created Putnam County. Catherine Walters penned her book, The Oconee River Tales to Tell. I'm sure many of you in the room have read that book, and if you haven't, I would encourage you to do so. And she made this is a direct quote from her book, or it's been altered a little bit. But basically, the indigenous people, or these forests, the primeval forest, was important to the Native Americans because it provided food and shelter and tools to work with until mine and your ancestors got here. And then they cut the trees down, and the fertile soil that was on this land at one time has washed away to the coast. And I think her last statement there, the Piedmont paradise was no more, is so telling. And I've often stood at Rock Eagle and looked at the sign that's right in front of the mound that says, "Tread softly here, white man, for long ere you came, strange races live, fought, and love." And I wondered what those people today would think of what we've done to their land if they could see it. I think they'd probably be disappointed. There are gullies on properties at Rock Eagle and close to Rock Eagle and within the Oconee National Forest that are big enough that you could put several semi-trucks on top of each other. And that was because cotton became the crop that covered the Piedmont because of the deep fertile soil and the climate that provided adequate rain. And by 1825, Georgia would lead the world in cotton production. Well, went too far. So, in 1854, the University of Georgia established a Department of Agriculture within the university that today is known as the College of Agricultural and Environmental Sciences. And there's evidence that there were boys' corn growing clubs beginning in New York as early as 1856. And you say, well, why are you throwing that in there, Arch? You'll understand that in just a moment if you don't know the history of 4-H. During the Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln signed the Morrill Act, which created the land-grant university system across the United States. So there's a land-grant college in each state in the Union. And in Georgia, of course, it's the University of Georgia, but to give you some context of that, it's Clemson, LSU, Texas A&M, University of Tennessee, University of Kentucky, Purdue, Cornell, Rutgers are all land-grant institutions that were created to teach students about agriculture and to take the research information off the shelf and deliver it to the people. Also, by 1870, cotton production in Georgia was over 700,000 bales again after the war. In 1874, Georgia also created, the state of Georgia, a Department of Agriculture. And we were the first state in the Union to have a Department of Agriculture. And as many of you who've grown up in Putnam County will know that Benjamin Hunt introduced 50 Jersey cows to Putnam County in 1876. And I understand about half of them didn't make it through that first year. The United States Congress passed the Hatch Act in 1877, creating experiment stations across the country within those land-grant universities. And here in Putnam County, there is also a research and education center, which was one of those research facilities that was operated by the University of Georgia. And many of you will remember Grady Calvert and his son, Vaughn Calvert, who ran those facilities, that facility for many years. And the early work at the Eatonton station was around cotton for the most part. But as time went by, most of that research today is done on cattle and forages at that location. Somehow I feel like I'm out of, no, I'm away. Also, in 1890, a second Morrill Act was passed creating land-grant universities at historically black colleges, particularly in the South. I think there are 17 or 18 of those schools. In Georgia, it's Fort Valley State. In Florida, it's Florida A&M, Alabama A&M, and Tuskegee in Alabama, Southern in Louisiana, and I could go on. There also, this has been surprising to me, and I don't know the history of it, but Delaware State has an 1890 institution, and so does Eastern Shores in Maryland. And West Virginia State is also an 1890 school. So, and by that time also, there were over 200 dairies in Putnam County by 1945. But you remember often Putnam, Morgan, and Greene were called the dairy capitals of the state. While there's still a few dairies and a lot of cows being milked, most of the dairy production in this state has moved further south. I have visited with a veterinarian who owns 2 dairies, I think down in Macon County, that milk 12,000 cows 3 times a day. So the dairy industry has changed quite a bit over the years. Seaman A. Knapp helped draft the legislation, or early legislation, that created the Hatch Act that I mentioned a moment ago, that disseminated practical scientific agricultural information to producers. And when the boll weevil invaded Texas in 1904, he started a farmers cooperative demonstration work while he was at USDA and employed early county agents to deliver that research-based information. And Knapp is known as the father of cooperative extension. And many of you will remember that Chuck Knapp was the president of the University of Georgia for a number of years. When he arrived at the University of Georgia, someone from Extension took him a history of Extension to explain that his great-grandfather had started the Extension service, and he really didn't know a whole lot about it. He did not have a land-grant institution background. G.C. Adams was one of 16 children, and he had only very little formal education. When he died in 1949, the Atlanta Constitution called him one of the best educated, best read, and most learned men in the state of Georgia. He later became a teacher at Pine Grove School in Newton County. He was a school principal. He was a school superintendent, or commissioner as they called it in those days. He was president of the 5th District Agricultural College, and you know that several of those district agricultural colleges eventually became colleges such as Abraham Baldwin in West Georgia and others across the state. He served in the state legislature and was elected Commissioner of Agriculture in 1932. But it is G.C. Adams that started the Boys Corn Clubs in 1904. And in the fall of 1905, they had their first corn club contest. Tom, we would call that the forerunner of DPA, the District Project Achievement. And each boy was to provide 10 ears of corn stacked in pyramid form. Now, I'm not sure why they had to put them in pyramid form, but when you look in the pictures, you can see that from those. And this picture is of G.C. Adams in the Newton County courthouse. I got a call, well, the call didn't come to me, but it came to the state 4-H office, and they immediately said, we'll have Arch call you back. But his house is for sale. Adams built a house right south of, on Highway 11, actually right north of Mansfield, and the house was built in 1914, and they're trying to sell it, and they wanted to know something about the history of G.C. Adams to try to sell the home. I think he also wanted 4-H to buy it, but we got enough problems with that. But it really was interesting. Right before I retired, I had an opportunity to visit the house. The current owner and some of the Adams family had lived in that house since he built the house, and so the family was finally selling it. And also, you notice that the average yield, corn yield, was about 10 bushels an acre in 1905. At the same time, P.D. Johnson, a black teacher in Newton County, planted a corn patch using the same methods that were being taught to the boys that Adams was working with. And then in 1906, the girls' tomato clubs were begun in Hancock County. Now I want you to think just a minute. Think about Newton County and Hancock and where we are today, and the proximity of the closeness of how all this began. In 1908, O.B. Martin was hired to head up USDA club work, they called it. This was a forerunner to what we know as 4-H today. And in 1909, Seaman Knapp appointed Thomas Early to become the first state leader of boys club work in the state of Georgia. Now, the joke I always make about this is that Early left and moved to Tennessee after 1 year or so. I think he must have been a volunteer. He was followed by J. Phil Campbell, who you see pictured here. And if you may know that J. Phil Campbell, I'll talk a little more about him. There's the large experiment station that was federally owned at one time, which is now part of the University of Georgia's College of Agriculture, is named for J. Phil Campbell. Campbell also became, let's see, I went too far there. Well, I guess my slide's not there, but I'll just tell you what I've got here. Campbell also became the first director of cooperative extension in 2014. But Mary Cresswell who was head of the state normal school in Athens, headed up the girls' canning work in 1911. And by 1920, Campbell and Cresswell had 27,000 young people participating in the 4-H program in Georgia. And Cresswell is, for those of you who attended the University of Georgia, Cresswell Hall, was a girls' dormitory, is named for Mary Cresswell, who also became the first dean of the College of Home Economics, which is now known as the College of Family and Consumer Sciences. I had the opportunity about a year and a half ago to speak to the Family and Consumer Science extension agents from across the state, and I spent a good bit of that time telling them the history of women in the, were first allowed to go to school in the College of Agriculture, and there was a department of home economics within the College of Agriculture that women could participate in. And so many people didn't realize that the first females were not allowed to attend the university until 1918, and there's a cornerstone in Sewell Hall which commemorates that. And of course, the Smith-Lieber Act was passed in 1914. Senator Hope Smith, no relation to me, was one of the co-authors with Frank Lieber, who was a member of the House of Representatives from the state of South Carolina. Well, that's my slide that I was trying to get to. But let's see, that's backwards. So Phil Campbell was the first director of extension, like I've told you, but also probably as importantly here is that, and George Cunningham, G.B. Cunningham, was later named state 4-H leader, position he held until 1942. In 1918 was the first recorded 4-H camp in Georgia at Salem School in DeKalb County. There were, I forget how many girls they had, but they had 3 days and they camped by a little lake, and they brought their own food and prepared it, but it was the first recorded 4-H camp in the state of Georgia. In 1919, Percy Hunter Stone was named county extension agent in Clark County. He was from Franklin County, Virginia, and he attended Hampton University. In 1923, Stone left Athens to become the first Negro state 4-H club leader at the Georgia Industrial College in Savannah, or what is now Savannah State. I think an interesting story here that has been recorded is that Stone came to Athens with a motorcycle. And that was his way to go around and visit farmers and do 4-H club work. He had an accident on that motorcycle and tore up the motorcycle, and the county commission in Clark County at the time bought him a car so that he could go around and visit the black farmers in the community. In 1923, when he got ready to leave, and he went to tell the Board of Commissioners that he was leaving, the commissioners went into private session, and when they came back out, they said, "You can have the car and take it with you." He must have been somewhat of a man ahead of his time, and maybe the Clark County Board of Commissioners, even at that time, may have been a little ahead of their time as well. In 2024, an Athens businessman named John Wilkins gave $5,000 to construct Camp Wilkins, which stood where the Driftmeyer Engineering Building stands on the University of Georgia campus today. It was a dormitory for students in the College of Agriculture during the September to May, and in the summertime, it doubled as a 4-H camp. There were 6 weeks for boys, 6 weeks for girls, and 1 week for FFA members. A few years ago, a lady brought me a 1931 copy of Camp Wilkins program. It is in detail of what professor was teaching what classes, really interesting to see what the camp looked like at that time. They swam in Lake Carroll, which was provided for by the Athens Kiwanis and Rotary clubs, hence the name Carroll. And that lake was located where the vet school is today. And if you look at the topography of that area, you can see where the railroad tracks crossed there. Could have probably was the dam for that lake area, but it was drained when the vet school came about in the late 1940s. Of course, we know that the stock market crashed in 1929, and in 1932, President Roosevelt's New Deal included the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and the Plantation Piedmont Land Utilization Project purchased 118 acres of worn-out cotton-to-death land in Putnam, Jasper, and Jones County. Frank Leverett was director of that land project, and he is the one that suggested that they dam up the 5 streams to create a lake that would provide swimming and fishing and boating to the citizens of Putnam County. And this was in 1936. In 1937, the Works Project Administration restored the Rock Eagle effigy using the work of C.C. Jones, and they added the 4-story observation tower and fence around the effigy. Now, as I say that, I think I skipped over the slide where I mentioned that in 1877, C.C. Jones was commissioned by the Smithsonian Institute to record the data and take measurements of both the Rock Eagle and what is then was known as the Little Rock Eagle, or Little Eagle, which was on land that belonged to the Little family. And there's I believe it's a Little Stinson graveyard that's close by. I know I'm right because Jimmy Marshall's shaking his head. One of the family called me about a year ago wanting to know, was their family recorded in this book? And I said, yes, there are a few pages. I offered to meet the lady out, and she never called me back, but I did mail her a copy of the book. That hence there is some tie between the Smithsonian and a little bit of what I have to say today. I found this really interesting that the Goodyear blimp Resolute flew over the mound on April 23rd of 1937. It says the streets of Eatonton were filled with onlookers as the blimp flew over the Rock Eagle. Eventually, the park was open to the public. There was this bathhouse that was constructed in the 1930s is now a part of the administration building at Rock Eagle. And if you go into the front part of the building, that is actually the same building. It's had to have a lot of work done over it over the years, but it's still standing. Let's see, where are we at there? So, Also in 1937, P.H. Stone realized that there was a need for a camping site for black 4-Hers to gather. And so they began work on a 4-H center in Dublin, Georgia, which was called the Dublin 4-H Center. Georgia 4-H held its second wildlife camp at an old Civilian Conservation Corps facility in the north of Dahlonega, Georgia, in 1937 as well. This was the beginning of the operation of what we call today Wauseega 4-H Center. And frankly, it still looks pretty much like it did in 1937. And I could talk about 2 hours about the challenges up there, but you don't want to hear all that. In 1939, let's see. In 1939, George B. Cunningham, who was state 4-H leader at the time, greeted the first group of campers that arrived at Camp Chatham Springs near College Park. This facility was later named Truett Fulton, and Sid Truett was the county agent there. It was actually established so that rural 4-H members could go to Atlanta and learn something about city life. I'll come back to that. We eventually closed it, but Ted Jenkins would tell you that you could stand in the outside of the buildings, and as the planes came over every minute and a half, you had to cease your conversation because you could read the numbers off the bottoms of the wings of the Delta jets. They were so loud and so low at that point. So when we got a chance to move, we did. Also in 1939, Georgia Power deeded 9.3 acres surrounding Rock Hawk to the University of Georgia. And Bill Sutton was named the 4th state leader in 1942. And camping was going on in Georgia at Wausaga, at Fulton, Lowndes County, Richmond County, at Camp Gabriel in Hamersham County, and Camp Sibley 4-H Club Camp down in Baldwin County as well. During World War II, Georgia 4-H members sold over $9.5 million of war bonds. And on September 17th of 1943, State 4-H President Sally Cook christened the USS Hoke Smith in honor of a former governor and U.S. senator who co-sponsored the bill that created the Cooperative Extension Service. In 1947, a World War II U.S. dive training center on Tybee Island became the 3rd 4-H camp to be operated by Georgia 4-H. And Mills B. Lane, the president of the Citizens Southern National Bank at the time, contributed $26,500 to make improvements to the facility. We still operate that facility today. It's known as Burton 4-H Center today, for a gift that was made by Bob and Maxine Burton of Burton and Burton in Athens, Georgia. Some of you may know of the company, but Bob and Maxine were very active 4-Hers, and Bob was actually a counselor there back in the 1960s. So Bill Sutton was aware of what was going on at Dublin and the work that P.H. Stone was doing. So Sutton began to dream of a place in the central part of the state of Georgia that could house 1,000 boys and girls for a week of camp at one time. And so around this table, it was in the auditorium, it is now sitting in the lobby of the dining hall. The Georgia 4-H was founded on November 17th of 1948. After being turned down by the Jekyll Island Authority to use the new Jekyll Island that the state had just purchased a few years before, John A. Red Smith, who was Putnam County Extension Agent along with Betty Longino Dooley, suggested that the area around Rock Eagle Park could be constructed as for a 4-H center. I saw one of Red Smith's daughter-in-laws earlier this week at Walter Reeves' memorial service, and I told her, I said, Hilda, I'm going to tell this story, and I said, they may not remember John Smith, but they will remember his wife, Sue Smith. Who, I'll just leave it with that, okay? J. Aubrey Williford president of the Eatonton Exchange Club, worked tirelessly to help cut the red tape so that the land could be leased to the Board of Regents to build the 4-H Center. And some of you remember his daughter, Lord, thank you, Norma Watterson. And I met her first cousin also on Monday at Walter Reeves Memorial Service as well, and we chatted for a few moments. Also, the people of Putnam County, this group are recorded in this history that I told you about, that they were the Rock Eagle, the Putnam County Rock Eagle Committee. And those of you who are natives of the Putnam County will recognize a lot of these names. I had the opportunity to meet and get to know a few of these in my years here, and certainly got to know some of their children and their ancestors. But it's amazing all the great work that Putnam County did to make it happen. And I think one of the things that you may or may not know is that originally the idea was for Rock Eagle to have 69,000 acres of the Oconee National Forest. And the idea with that would be an endowment for the center. And I think some of the people, maybe those in charge in Putnam County, were concerned that they would lose income from timber sales off that property. But what I can tell you is that Rock Eagle over the years has been more aggressive in cutting timber than the National Forest is, and so maybe it would have been better for Rock Eagle to have it. And also, it would certainly be nice to be able to sell about 1,000 acres of timber every year and make some of the improvements that we need. But it's just, but Putnam County and the people gave money to build the chapel at Rock Eagle. And so they will always be remembered for their contributions to this project. Bill Sutton and Don Hastings of the Hastings Seed Company were in a Rotary Club meeting in Athens one day, and the speaker was Herman Talmadge, who was governor at the time. And Sutton was struggling to raise money for the Rock Eagle project, and he turned to Hastings and said, "You reckon we could get a meeting with the governor?" And Hastings said, "Well, I'll go ask him right now." So he walked up to the table and said, "Governor, could we meet with you to talk about the Rock Eagle project?" And he said, "Well, I have a meeting tomorrow afternoon at 1 o'clock, but I'll have my secretary clear my calendar, and y'all come meet, and I'll invite the Attorney General, and we'll see what we can do." Well, Talmadge said, "Well, I'll match every private dollar you raise with a state dollar, and I'll also give you skilled prison labor to construct the facility." And so they sent 120 prisoners to Putnam County eventually to build Rock Eagle. So in this picture we see these gentlemen signing the document where Talmadge provides that skilled prison labor, and the work was underway. So Cooper, Barrett, Skinner, Woodbury, and Cooper were chosen as architects to build the original facility, and the two renderings are the original renderings of the original cabins and the floor plan for those original cabins. Some of this is on me. I'll just keep taking my finger off the right button. So with the architects in hand and $40,000 in the bank, they held a groundbreaking ceremony on August 23rd of 1951. And I always enjoy visiting with James and Betty Dooley at church every Sunday, because I usually end up sitting there with them. And Miss Betty would tell the story. The State 4-H Council meeting was down in Milledgeville at the Georgia College for Women, and they drove up here out in the briars and the weeds of what was Rock Eagle Park at the time for this groundbreaking ceremony. And she said that Nell Thrash, I didn't know Nell Thrash, but anyway, Nell Thrash kind of admonished her because she did not have on her hose. And Betty told that story quite a few times, and it's also in the book. And she said I didn't need to have on any hose because they're going to get torn out there in all those briars. Just another great memory of the work that had to happen. When Bill Sutton began the fundraising efforts, one of the first things they did is they asked children to bring eggs, and they would sell those eggs and put them in the foundation coffers to do the work on help build Rock Eagle. I think the most heartwarming story is the fact that the children at Baxley Children's Home down in Baxley, Georgia, had no money and they had no chickens, but they were given eggs for breakfast. And so they agreed not to eat their eggs at breakfast and asked for those eggs to be given to sell, to give money to the 4-H Foundation. And it's recorded that each child got a receipt from the Georgia 4-H Foundation for a nickel. There were other many stories that Sutton would tell, and I wish I had taken time to listen to a speech that he gave at Rock Eagle in 1967. But he told often that the coffers were low one day, and he was at his mother's house, or she was visiting, and while he was talking about how hard it was to raise the money, she got up and left the room and came back with $1 and gave him $1. And she said, "Here, take this $1 and have faith so that others will have faith in you." And he said that after that moment, I never lost my faith again in that Rock Eagle was going to be built. They estimated that at the rate they started, it would take something like 40 years to finish it, but it was finished in about 5 years. Wrong button again. Again, Mills B. Lane contributed $10,000 for this construction of the first cabin. So the warden that worked at oversaw the construction, when he got the $10,000, Sutton told him to build one cabin. And so they started work on that cabin. And Sutton came back through Rock Eagle one day and he looked, and they had dug the foundation for 3 cabins. And Sutton went to the warden and said, "Hey, I told you I only got enough money to build one cabin. Why have you started 3? And he looked at him and he said, "What the eye don't see, the heart don't ponder." And so Sutton said, I took that statement and went back out and raised more money. If you go to Rock Eagle today, you notice that we're replacing the cabins. But when you drive in behind the chapel, the first thing you see is 6 old cabins. And I told them when we started the project, I said, those will be the last 6 cabins to come down, that we need to show that we still have a need. Because what the eye don't see, the heart don't ponder. The prisoners lived on site. They lived, the old bathhouse became the quarters for the guards. There was a prison. The isolation cells were still there. When I arrived in 1988, we eventually tore out all the cells and all the bars, and all that's office space now for our programs. There were a number of great stories told about the work of the prisoners, and I'll try to share 3 of those quickly. There was an Auburn graduate who was an engineer that was working on the project. He'd be there 3 or 4 months, be released. 3 or 4 months later, he'd be thrown back in prison. And they asked him why, and he'd get to sign Rock Eagle every time. They said, why do you keep coming back? And he said, well, it's because I failed to pay alimony. And he said, I will not pay that woman another red cent. I'd rather spend the rest of my life in jail. Another man was wiring the Georgia Power building at Rock Eagle and was released during the project. And he went home for a week and came back to help finish the project. There was a Prince Albert tobacco can found in the walls of the old dining hall, now Sutton Hall. And inside that Prince Albert can was a note, and on that note was written, "Here I paid my debt to society," and it was signed by an individual. But Sutton's probably favorite story is that a couple of the prisoners came to him when the coffers were low because they heard too, they knew they would have to go back to another prison somewhere, and said, "Mr. Sutton, if you'll give us an automobile, there's a couple of us here that are safe crackers. If you'll give us an automobile, we'll come back in the morning with enough money to finish this project." While Sutton never entertained the idea, he knew that what they were saying, they would have come back to finish the job. Miss Irene Carnes McElroy Holt was hired to manage the restaurant on the public side of the lake, which opened to the public before the center was open, and was also the beginning of Rock Eagle Sunday lunch. And I think that if you can make out the picture on the top right, I had never seen this, I think, until Thursday. I thought this was just a great picture. We actually still have one of those old chairs that was that's in that picture stored away. Miss Irene often told the story that when they opened the center for the first summer, that they had the dining hall was not complete, and they actually cooked all the meals in the restaurant, took them over to the center and served them, and brought all the dishes back to the restaurant and washed them. And can you imagine doing that for several hundred children 3 times a day? It was quite a task. And in the written work that Anna Cook Hopkins wrote, she wrote, "Despite the trials this land has seen, it found its calling on October 30th of 1954, when Rock Eagle was dedicated. It was carried live on WSB radio. Herman Talmadge was the keynote speaker for the day, and there were thousands upon thousands of people there. And we have real, and I say real, R-E-E-L, footage of that day, and we have used some of it in some of our presentations, and was actually able to take some of Sutton speaking and overlay it while he's at the podium, and you can see him talking. He's not, of course, it doesn't sync with what he's saying. But on that day, when Sutton spoke, he was only speaking to say thank you to all the people who had made Rock Eagle possible in the State 4-H Center. Cecil Johnson was hired as the first director in 1955, and the first event that was held there was the Southeast District Tractor School. A few years ago, I don't know if any of you ever watched RFD TV, Rodney Miller, who has a program, I can't even think of the name of it, but he was working with the University of Georgia at the time, and he is an international tractor farm enthusiast, and he asked me, he said, "Where's that tractor at?" And I said, "Well, I have no idea where it's at." But anyway, this was one of 5 tractors that were made to cut away so that they could pull it apart and train people on how to work on tractors. And he was wondering, was it still at Rock Eagle? And I said, no, I'm sure they just brought it here for that meeting that day. Interesting what you learn over time. And then these three people, Cecil Johnson, Frank Fitch, and Etta Marion Thompson, moved here in the 1955-56 time frame. Cecil was the director of the center. Etta Marion was the dietitian, and Frank was hired as a wildlife biologist. And part of that was because they thought they were going to still get more of the national forest than what they ended up with, which was about 1,500 acres at the time. And these were the people that I knew as a 4-H'er. I worked as a summer camp counselor with these three people. I think one of the most interesting stories that was ever told was I was at Miss Etta Marion's retirement, I think in 1976, and some of you will remember Miss Etta Marion was not real, didn't hear very well. And so obviously Johnny Williamson, who was head of the maintenance department out there, had gone hunting one weekend and harvested a deer and brought it back and hung it in the basement where the coolers were at the time, and which would not be allowed today, but at that day and time, you know, probably wasn't, nobody thought anything about it. But later, a salesman came by to make a call on Miss Thompson, and he said, I understand that someone in the county, y'all had a hunting accident this week, and a man was shot and killed. And she said, yes, and we've got him hanging in the basement. Because all she heard was deer killed, and so she told him it was hanging in the basement. But she was a lovely lady, and many of you will remember her son, Jimmy Thompson, who later started Hawthorne Medical in Athens, and my doctor, Patrick Lucas, was hired by Jimmy, and when Patrick went in for the interview, he saw that, Jimmy saw that Patrick was a counselor, and the first thing he said, what tribe were you in? So, also, the work on Dublin 4-H Center continued as the University of Georgia people went back and continued to help P.H. Stone and the black leaders complete that facility, and it was dedicated in November of 1957. The first summer of camping at Rock Eagle didn't go so well. Martha Harrison Jones, or Martha Harrison, was asked to go to Cornell and get her master's and do a thesis on camping. When I moved to Carrollton many years ago, Martha had married Albert Jones, a 60-year-old bachelor over there, and we invited me to her home, and she gave me a copy of her thesis when I left Carrollton to go to Rock Eagle as the center director. It's laying on my desk. I still have an office at Rock Eagle, and it's laying there. I looked at it just this morning. So they used her thesis, and it didn't work out. But then the next summer, they hired Harold Darden, who happened to be a county agent in Carroll County as well. And they brought the two of them together, and they began to develop a program. And that program is still in use today, and the basics of that program has been replicated at all our 4-H centers across the state. I wish Harold Darden or Martha Harrison were here to tell the stories, because they're just fabulous stories of how they went about developing this summer camping program. In 1974, a pioneer camp facility was built in the woods at Rock Eagle. It was used as a part of the summer camping program for a number of years, and then it was also named for Frank Fitch in 1994. And it's been used for special camping programs over the past several years, and as a matter of fact, They've installed some new tents out there, large tents, with some funds that were provided by the military for camp programs for military youth. Rock Eagle flourished throughout the 1970s. Cecil retired in 1975, and Bob Lindstrom was named the center director. He was there 2 years before leaving to go to Washington, D.C. to manage the National 4-H Center. And he was the first to bring about a what was called Operation Facelift, because there really had not been any money put into maintenance, and there was a lot of deferred maintenance. Most of what he did was primarily cosmetic in 76 and 77. Tommy Walton served as state 4-H leader from 1955 to 1975. And after his retirement, Tom Rogers was hired as state 4-H leader in 1978. Rogers hired a young lady named Diane Davies to develop a 4-H environmental education program. And that program today, frankly, is the only reason that any of our 4-H centers are still open. Because what it did, it brought school kids into those facilities and allowed us to generate revenue during the week. And so when you think about Rock Eagle and you think, well, you're about to get busy out there because summer's coming, we've been busy. All our centers have been busy. And when the pandemic shut us down a few years ago, 43% of the revenue at the 4-H centers is generated by the 4-H environmental education program. And so those of us who are traditional 4-Hers appreciate what that program has done to bring kids to the facilities, but it's also been able to teach children about conservation of our natural resources and the importance of protecting our environment over time. 3 years later, Dr. Tal Duval and Tom Rogers worked with Speaker Tom Murphy and the General Assembly to acquire the old Dolphin Club and Motor Hotel on the south end of Jekyll Island. This facility was a black motel in the days of segregation. And when we talk about separate, it was separate, but it certainly wasn't equal. The state went through several different iterations after the passage of the Civil Rights Act and how they were going to utilize it. And 4-H took on that operation of that facility in 1982. Ted Jenkins can tell you a lot more about it because he had to live through the first few years of the operation of that site and the challenges that they had with it over the many years. But it certainly turned out actually to be the most profitable location we had, and that's because it's on the beach. and schools love it. 84% of the business there, when we closed that facility, I'll tell you about that in just a moment, was from the environmental education program, and schools couldn't use it. 1984, Tom Rogers led a fundraising effort to renovate the 54 cabins in many of the buildings at Rock Eagle. And the capstone of that project was the opening of the Museum of Natural History, which was later named in honor of Diane Davis, who started the environmental education program. And again, Herman Talmadge came and spoke at the rededication of the center during State 4-H Council in June of 1990. In late let's see, that's the museum. Maybe I was on the wrong slide, I apologize. In the late 1990s, the Georgia 4-H Foundation embarked on another capital campaign called the Pledge for Life campaign, which added 2 aquatic laboratories, a wildlife ecology building, a new swimming pool, a Watson Brown pavilion out at the old Scott family home site, and the Georgia EMC building and senior pavilion were renovated and expanded. And then we did the renovation and expansion of the old restaurant to honor 18 individuals who are considered the original founders of Rock Eagle. And this, the photograph on the right A couple of the founders are in that picture. Most of those people are either extension people or family of some of the people who helped, who are considered the original founders of Rock Eagle, and Irene Holt was the last of those to pass away. In 2004, another part of the Pledge for Life campaign was to expand and renovate Sutton Dining Hall at Rock Eagle, but with the help of the chair of the Board of Regents, we were able to have a feasibility study done, and the feasibility study said that you need just to build a new building, and so we did, and we opened this dining hall that you know today in February of 2009. In 2004, Georgia 4-H entered into a lease with Camp Fortson in Henry County, which is near Hampton, Georgia. This facility is behind the Atlanta Motor Speedway, and we closed the operation at College Park because they would not allow us to have a long-term lease again, and we opened Fortson. It was eventually given to us by the 501c3 that owned it in 2015. In 2004, we began to develop plans for the replacement of the 54 cabins. We built a prototype which opened in June of 2006, which was 20 years ago. Today, 42 of the 54 cabins have been replaced. One of the projects that I was so pleased to be able to work on was the Rock Hawk Tower. In the early 90s, we worked with Commissioner Dennis and Catherine Walters and others to put a fence around the Rock Hawk. Larry Moore, who many of you may know, came to me and asked could they run the Rock Hawk trails through our property. I said yes. He said, we have an idea about building a tower. And I said, well, whenever you get ready to build the tower, we'll have to be involved in that because it is on university property. And so over several years working with Larry and the Georgia Power, Putnam County, Rock Eagle, and the Georgia 4-H Foundation, we were able to erect this tower and put another fence around the Rock Hawk and get some Native Americans to help us with some interpretive work. The reason this site has not been restored like the Rock Eagle has is because the Native Americans asked us not to restore it, to leave it in its natural state. And so it has not been disturbed in any way. I would encourage you, if you have a moment, if you haven't been out there, to take a moment and ride out there, read the interpretive work that was done by Georgia College. I read some of that this morning because it's out at Rock Eagle as well, not all of it, but some of it is there. Because as I thought about coming here today, I said, I too need to go back and see what has happened. And so I climbed the steps, or the old wooden steps inside the Rock Eagle Tower to view the Rock Eagle mound itself. In 2015 and 16, the Jekyll Island Authority tore down the old Jekyll Island 4-H Center and constructed a new facility. They wanted to call it Camp Jekyll, so we say Georgia 4-H at Camp Jekyll. We opened it back for operation in January of 2017. We also operate a small nature center on the intercoastal waterway called Tidelands Nature Center, which we began operating in the year 2000. And then more recently, right as I retired, a few weeks before my retirement, we gathered at the Emory Thomas Auditorium, which is the only remaining building on the site of the old Dublin 4-H Center, because we felt it was appropriate to recognize the contributions of the Dublin 4-H Center to the existence of the Georgia 4-H program. And then also on that day, we recognized P.H. Stone, who was about to be inducted into the National 4-H Hall of Fame in the fall of 22. I worked with a lady from Savannah. The city of Dublin hired this company to get this place put on the National Register of Historic Places. And she called me and met with me at Rock Eagle, and then went to Athens to the Special Collections Library and went through a lot of things. And she called me one day and she said, Arch, have you ever heard that Bill Sutton got the idea to build Rock Eagle from P.H. Stone or from the Dublin 4-H Center? I said, no, I've never heard that. About 2 weeks ago, as I was preparing these comments, I picked up in my office in Athens are just boxes and boxes of historical documents, and happened to be on top of one of them something that said 4-H history, and so I picked it up and began to flip through the pages and read. And in it was written by Ronald McGuire, Ted. And when I read the line, she said, Bill Sutton got the idea to build Rock Eagle, our state 4-H center in the central part of the state, from P.H. Stone. So I think sometimes we forget who came before us. And sometimes we don't always want to point a finger and give credit for everything in the right way. So it's been my privilege and honor to recognize P.H. Stone. I've been to the induction of people into the National 4-H Hall of Fame many times, and we could not find a family member to give that, to accept that recognition. And so I talked to several people in the black community, and they said, Arch, why don't you just go do it? And I did, and I read my comments, and at the end, I just simply said, this is a recognition that's long overdue. And I don't know how many times I've been, not because of me, but because of P.H. Stone. That's the only time I've ever seen anybody get a standing ovation at that event. Later this year, probably this fall, about September, we will add an elevator to the Rock Eagle Effigy Tower. This is a dream that's been on the books for about 25 years. And 3 years ago at the gala in 2023, funding was raised and wasn't enough to do this project. And we still don't have enough money, so if you want to contribute to that, you're welcome to do that too. But we do have the plans, and we're just waiting on what they call a guaranteed maximum price. Hopefully we'll begin construction in September. Had the Creek Indians not agreed to cede the land to the United States, had Abraham Lincoln not signed the Morrill Act, and had Seaman Knapp not started demonstration farming in Texas. G.C. Adams gave birth to the 4-H clubs, which eventually brought about the start of summer camping. The Great Depression brought about the Piedmont Land Utilization Act, and Frank Leverett thought damming up a lake would be a good idea and provide recreation for the citizens of Putnam County. Bill Sutton had a dream of a state 4-H center, and John Red Smith suggested using Rock Eagle Park. Henry Hearn, Tom Gregory, Aubrey Williford, and others from Putnam County got behind the idea and supported the construction of the 4-H Center at Rock Eagle. Martha Harrison Jones and Harold Darden developed a summer camping program. And Tom Rogers hired Diane Davis to develop an environmental education program. And had it not been for these and many, many others whose names are not known, we may not be sitting here today talking about Rock Eagle in Putnam County. So I'll close these three quotes. Atten was the director of 4-H at USDA, and he said the Center's Hills will now grow a crop even greater than the cotton and livestock which once covered the area. It will be used to develop the boys and girls who will become our nation's leaders. Tom Rogers said that 4-H is a phenomenal success in Georgia, and Rock Eagle is the centerpiece of that success, hence the name of the book. And Bill Sutton said in that speech I mentioned in 1967 at the Southern Region Volunteer Leaders Forum at Rock Eagle, that I believe that any human being, child that is born and grows up should have the opportunity to be a great somebody. And I believe that the training of 4-H club work helps move them in that direction so that they can become a great somebody. And so I've not talked about the 4-H program a whole lot, but that's why we're here. And that's what we do. We develop children and give them opportunities that change their lives. We help them be things that become people that they didn't realize they can become. And it's because of 4-H that farm boys like me still have an opportunity to make a contribution somewhere. Thank you so much for this opportunity, and I wish you all the best the rest of the afternoon.